I was told not to say this. And I need you to understand, that instruction didn't come from a doctor or a lawyer or anyone in this world. It came from the other side, and I'm saying it anyway. My name is Peggy Callahan. I was a registered nurse for 24 years, emergency department. I have watched more people die than I can count. I know what clinical death looks like. I know what it sounds like. I know the exact sequence of sounds a monitor makes when a heart stops producing a viable rhythm. I have stood at the foot of a bed and told a family that everything that could be done had been done. I have done this dozens of times, and I can tell you, from both sides of that experience now, that nothing in my training, nothing in my career, nothing I had ever seen in an emergency room prepared me for what happened to me on the morning of March 14th. Not a single thing. It was a night shift. That matters because night shifts in an emergency department have a specific texture, quieter, longer, the particular exhaustion that comes from a body being awake when it wants to be asleep. I had been on since 11 the evening before. I remember what I was doing in the minutes before it happened. I had just updated a chart. A patient in Bay 3, a 57-year-old man who had come in with chest discomfort that turned out to be acid reflux, and I had just documented his discharge instructions. I reached for my coffee. The cup was sitting on the edge of the nurse's station. It was still warm. I reached for it, and I didn't get there. That is the last physical memory I have of that shift. What I know from the medical record, because I have read the medical record, because the nurse in me needed to read the medical record, is that I was found on the floor at 2:14 in the morning by my colleague Sarah, who heard me fall. I had suffered an acute aortic dissection. That is a tear in the wall of the aorta, the main artery that carries blood from the heart to the rest of the body. It is an event that kills most of the people it happens to before they reach a hospital. I was already in a hospital. Sarah and Dominic, my other colleague, began CPR immediately. They worked on me for 4 minutes before the crash cart was available. The team that responded, I know these people. I have worked alongside these people. They worked on me for 27 minutes. 27 minutes without a viable heartbeat. I know what that number means. I have sat with families in small consultation rooms with bad lighting and explained what that number means for brain function, for organ viability, for the likelihood of meaningful recovery. I have been that nurse. I know the number. And I want you to hold it, because what I am about to tell you about what happened during those 27 minutes is the reason I resigned from nursing, the reason I filled 3 composition notebooks before I could bring myself to speak a single word of this out loud, and the reason I am here right now, saying something I was specifically told not to say. I was not unconscious during those 27 minutes. I was somewhere else entirely. The first thing I became aware of was not light. I want to correct that immediately because I know what people expect to hear. There was no tunnel. There was no runway of white with deceased relatives waiting at the end of it. What happened was instantaneous, and it was, the only word I have for it is, repositioning. One moment I was reaching for a cup of coffee. The next moment I was above the nurse's station, looking down at a woman in navy blue scrubs collapsed on the floor, and 2 people I recognized were kneeling over her, and the woman on the floor was me. I want you to understand what it is like to look at your own body from the outside. It is not frightening. That is the first surprise. I think some part of me that was still functioning as a nurse expected, to feel panic, clinical detachment at minimum. What I felt was something I can only describe as a very deep, very quiet recognition. Like realizing you have been mispronouncing a word your entire life and suddenly hearing it pronounced correctly. Something clicked into a right position. And I watched Sarah doing compressions on my chest, and I thought, with complete calm, she has good form. She really does have good form. I had trained with Sarah. I knew her technique, and I thought, that is going to work. And then I was no longer in the emergency department. What I am about to tell you is the reason I came back. Not the reason I survived. The medical team is the reason I survived. I mean the reason I was sent back. Because there is a difference. And that difference is what this is about. I want you to stay with me. I know some of what follows is going to be difficult to hear. I am not asking you to believe me on faith. I am asking you to hear a 24-year emergency department nurse who has no reason to make this up, who resigned her career over it, who sat on this for 14 months because she understood exactly how it would sound. I am asking you to hear it, and then decide for yourself what to do with it. Where I went after leaving that department, I still don't have a name for it that satisfies me. Place feels too small. Dimension feels too clinical. What I can tell you is that it was more real than anything I have experienced before or since. The nurses' station felt like a photograph of a place. This was the place itself. I became aware of a presence before I became aware of anything visual. Not saw. Became aware of. The way you become aware of someone standing behind you in a dark room. Not by any single sense, but by everything at once. And I knew who it was the way you know your mother's voice in a dark room before she says a word. I did not need an introduction. I did not need a credential. I knew. And the first thing I experienced was not a greeting. It was a question, not in words. I want to be precise about this because I think precision is important. It was not spoken. It arrived as a complete understanding, the way a piece of music arrives, not word by word, but whole. And what it asked me was something like, "Do you understand what time you are in?" Not the hour of the day, the time, the era, the specific position in a sequence of events that the world I had just left was currently occupying. I understood the question. I said yes without speaking, and then I was shown something I have spent 14 months trying to find words for. I was shown people. Not in the way you see people on a street or in a waiting room. I was shown them the way a doctor sees a scan, with information attached. A triage nurse sorts incoming patients by acuity. Who is in immediate danger, who can wait, who will be fine. What I was shown was something like that, except the criterion for sorting was not what had already happened to these people. It was what they were going to choose. A decision that had not been made yet, or in some cases had already been made. And the sorting was biological, not moral. I want to be very clear about that because I think it matters. This was not a judgment. There was no condemnation in it. It was a medical fact, a clinical reality. The way a contraindication is a clinical reality, not a punishment, just a fact about what this substance does to this body under these conditions. And what I was shown is that there is a shot coming. Not the shots that have already been. Something coming. Something that will be presented in a specific way, under specific conditions, in response to a specific event. And the people I was shown in that category, the ones who would not survive what is coming, were defined entirely by whether they took that shot. That was the criterion. That was the only variable in the sorting. I stood there, and I am going to use stood because I have no better word. I stood there and I pushed back, because I am a nurse. Because my first instinct when I am given clinical information is to ask for the mechanism, the evidence, the study. I asked, which shot? And what I received in response was not a brand name. It was a description of the conditions under which the shot would arrive. And those conditions are what I am here to give you today, because those are the things you will be able to recognize. Those are the things that will tell you when you are looking at what I was shown. The first condition is speed. When something moves faster than it should. When a timeline that normally takes years is compressed into weeks. When an approval process that exists for very specific reasons is set aside for reasons you are told are necessary. That speed is the signal. I have worked in medicine long enough to know that speed is almost never a reason to stop asking questions. Speed is usually a reason to ask more of them. What I was shown is that the shot I am warning you about will arrive on a timeline that does not allow for the normal process of verification. And that timeline will be presented to you as evidence of urgency, not as a reason for caution. I want you to hold that, because I know how those announcements sound. I have heard them. I grew up hearing them. We all have. There is a specific register that official medical communication uses when it wants to move quickly and needs public compliance to do so. It is not quite reassuring and not quite commanding. It lives in the space between. And what I was shown is that the shot I am describing will arrive inside that register. It will sound like every responsible official communication you have ever heard. It will have credentials attached to it. It will have press conferences. It will have the faces of serious people in serious rooms telling you that this is the responsible thing to do. And underneath all of it, if you are paying attention, you will feel the thing I am about to describe. The second condition is the disappearance of choice. I want to be careful here because I am not talking about a legal mandate. I am not talking about a law. What I was shown is more subtle than a law and more powerful than a law. It is the social and professional and familial pressure that precedes any legal mandate by months. The moment when saying no to something stops being a medical decision and starts being a statement about who you are, about whether you care about other people, about whether you are the kind of person who can be trusted. You have felt versions of this before. You know what it feels like when a personal medical choice stops being personal. What I was shown is that the shot I am warning you about will arrive at the exact moment when saying no stops feeling like a choice. That is the marker I was given. Not a date, not a brand name, a feeling. And the instruction I was given, the specific words I received, and these are the closest I can come to the actual transmission, was, when it stops feeling like your choice, that is the one. I have turned that over in my mind for 14 months. When it stops feeling like your choice, that is the one. I need you to stop for a moment. I need you to actually hear what I just said, not because it is dramatic, not because I want you to be afraid. Fear is not what I brought back, and I will explain that before I'm done. But because that sentence was given to me in the clearest communication I have ever received in my life, across either side of death, and I was told to deliver it plainly. And a nurse who spent 24 years educating patients about their options, who has never once in her professional life told a patient what to do, is telling you directly, do not take that shot. That is not a political statement. I don't have a political statement in me. I am too tired for politics and too changed by what I experienced to care about the performance of it. This is a clinical warning delivered from outside the clinic, from the one vantage point that gave me information the clinic does not have access to. I am not asking you to trust my politics. I am asking you to consider that a nurse who died for 27 minutes and came back carrying a specific, verifiable description of conditions that you will recognize when you see them might be worth 20 minutes of your attention. And there is a third condition. This is the one that is hardest to describe, and the one I come back to most often in the notebooks I filled before I was ready to speak. The third condition is the framing. What I was shown is that when this shot arrives, it will not be framed as information. It will be framed as identity. What I mean by that, and I am choosing these words because I have had a long time to find the right ones, is that the choice to take it or not will be presented to you not as a medical decision, but as a declaration of the kind of person you are. Your willingness or unwillingness will be read as evidence of something about your character, your values, your relationship to the people around you. This is not medicine. Medicine does not work this way. When your doctor tells you that you should take a blood pressure medication, she does not tell you that failing to take it makes you a bad neighbor. The moment a medical recommendation begins recruiting your identity rather than informing your decision, that is the line. That is the third marker. These three conditions together are the description I was given. Speed that bypasses verification, the social disappearance of choice, identity recruited in place of evidence. I came back from 27 minutes of clinical death carrying those three things. I sat on them for 14 months. I watched. I waited. I told my daughter. I told one friend. I kept the notebooks and I prayed, in the quiet way of someone who has been to the other side of prayer and cannot go back to performing it. I prayed that I was wrong, that what I had seen was not what I thought, that the conditions would not appear. And then I watched a press conference. I won't tell you which one. I won't give you a date or a name, because what I was told to give you is not a target. It is a description. And when I watched that press conference, I recognized the description. Not all three conditions fully, not yet, but enough. Enough that I called my daughter and said to her, "This is why I came back." Returning to my body was not relief. I need you to understand that. Every account of a near-death experience I had ever heard before my own described the return as a kind of rescue. The person pulled back from the brink, grateful to be alive, overwhelmed with appreciation for the ordinary world. That is not what happened to me. Returning to my body felt like a door closing between me and something I had not finished knowing. Like being pulled out of a book in the middle of a chapter. The peace on the other side, and there was a peace there that I do not have the words for, that makes every moment of contentment I have had in 61 years of living feel like a pencil sketch of the real thing. That peace was on the other side of the door, and I was back in a body that was sore and cold and had tubes in it, in a room I recognized, with my daughter Melissa's face in the doorway. I felt her grief before I heard her voice. That is the honest version. And I understood, without anyone telling me, that the reason I was back was not the medical team's skill, though God bless them for it. The reason I was back was the commission, the specific task, the message that had a person's face on it, not one face, many faces. People who would find this, who were meant to find this, who had been feeling for a long time that something was being withheld from them and needed to hear it from someone who had no reason to perform it. I have carried this for 14 months in 3 composition notebooks and a silence that cost me 2 friendships and a career I loved. Giving it to you today costs nothing by comparison, and I would do it 100 times. I want to leave you with something practical. Because I was a nurse for 24 years, and impractical is not in my vocabulary, and because the person I was shown on the other side, the presence I recognized in that impossible room, gave me a warning that was always intended to be actionable. This was never meant to be fear. This was meant to be preparation. Tomorrow morning, before your phone is in your hand, and before the news has told you what to think about the world, I want you to sit for 1 minute with what you heard today. Not to be afraid. I mean it. Fear is not the response this calls for. The response this calls for is readiness. Quiet, clear, non-dramatic readiness. The kind that a good nurse has before a difficult shift. Not panic. Preparation. During that 1 minute, I want you to ask yourself one question. Not out loud necessarily, just honestly. The question is, if tomorrow I were presented with a medical intervention on a timeline that moved faster than it should, surrounded by social pressure that made saying no feel like a statement about my character, would I notice? Would I feel the shape of what I just described? Or would the conditions be invisible to me because I had not been told what to look for? That is the question. That is all I am asking you to carry, because you cannot prepare for something you cannot recognize. And what I was given during those 27 minutes was a description. The description is yours now. It is sitting in you right now as you hear this. And when the conditions arrive, and I was shown that they will arrive, I want you to recognize them. That is the whole of the commission. Not resistance for the sake of resistance. Not fear for the sake of fear. Recognition. Clear, calm, informed recognition. Followed by a clear, calm, informed refusal. Do not take that shot. I know what those words cost me to say. I know how they sound coming from someone who spent 24 years administering medications, who believes in medicine, who sat with dying people and was grateful for every pharmaceutical tool in the room. I know. And I am saying it anyway, because I was told to say it plainly, and plain is the only language I know. If what I shared today reached you, If any part of it landed in a place that felt true rather than frightening, I want to ask you to subscribe to this channel. Not because I need the number, because there are more accounts like mine, and the people who carry them need to know that someone is still listening. That someone thinks this kind of testimony deserves to exist on record. Your subscription tells the world that first-person accounts from people who have been to the other side and come back carrying something specific deserve more than dismissal. That is all. That is the whole ask. And in the comments, I want to ask you one thing. Not about me, about you. I want to know, how long have you felt that something was coming? Not what you read, not what a politician told you, not what a headline confirmed. You, your own sensing of it. How long have you been living with that feeling without quite being able to name it? Write it. Just the number of years, if that is all you can say. I will read every one. I kept this for 14 months. I have given it to you today. Whatever is coming, and something is coming, I was shown that clearly. I hope this reaches you in time.